Linda Turner had grown used to quiet days. Her house in Seattle felt too large now, filled with echoes of her late husband Robert's laughter. She spent her mornings watering plants, her afternoons reading by the window, and her evenings staring at the same old photographs. Life had slowed down after Robert passed, and though she tried to keep busy, loneliness had quietly become part of her routine. One Thursday afternoon, while making tea, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her son, Eric. He rarely texted more than a few words, always busy with his job in San Francisco. But this time the message was different. "Mom, how about a weekend trip? Just you, me, and Chloe. We could go somewhere peaceful. You need a break." Linda blinked at the screen. A trip? It had been years since the three of them had gone anywhere together. At first, she hesitated. Traveling reminded her too much of Robert. They used to take road trips every spring, him driving, her choosing the music. But something about Eric's message tugged at her heart. Maybe it was his tone, softer than usual, or maybe it was the thought of seeing her granddaughter smile again. "All right," she replied simply, not realizing how much that one word would change her life. 2 days later, Linda found herself packing a small suitcase. She didn't bother with fancy clothes, just sweaters, jeans, and her favorite scarf. She added her old camera at the last moment, the one Robert had given her on their 20th anniversary. She hadn't used it in years, but something told her to bring it. When Eric pulled up in his car, Linda was surprised to see him smiling widely. "Ready, Mom?" he asked. Chloe sat in the back seat, waving excitedly. The drive to Lake Tahoe took several hours, filled with soft music and easy chatter. For the first time in a long while, Linda felt relaxed. The open road, the mountains in the distance, the sound of her family laughing, it all felt familiar, almost healing. As they reached the lake, sunlight danced across the water like gold dust. The air smelled of pine and fresh wind. Eric had rented a cabin near the shore, small but cozy, with wooden walls and a big window facing the lake. "It's perfect," Linda said, genuinely touched. That evening, they ate dinner by the fireplace. Chloe talked endlessly about her school projects, while Eric grilled vegetables outside. Linda sat quietly, soaking in the warmth. The sound of the fire crackling and her family's laughter filled the cabin, reminding her of the life she used to have. After dinner, she stepped out onto the deck. The lake shimmered under the fading sun, and the breeze carried a calm stillness she hadn't felt in years. She leaned on the railing and smiled faintly. Maybe this trip really was a good idea. Just then, she noticed a figure near the water, a man standing by the next cabin, tossing small pebbles into the lake. He looked about her age, with grey hair and a thoughtful expression. He turned slightly and caught her gaze. For a brief second, their eyes met. He nodded politely, and she smiled back. It was a small moment, so small that she almost dismissed it. But something about it lingered in her mind as she went back inside. Later that night, as Eric and Chloe watched a movie, Linda lay in bed, thinking about how strange it felt to be happy again. It wasn't a loud, exciting happiness. It was quiet, gentle, and unfamiliar. She didn't know what awaited her in the next few days. But for the first time since Robert's passing, she felt curious about tomorrow. When she finally drifted to sleep, the lake shimmered softly outside the window, and that brief glance with the man by the water stayed with her, tucked somewhere between memory and possibility. She had no idea that this trip meant to bring her family closer, would soon bring something unexpected into her own heart, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The next morning would begin like any other vacation day, but nothing about what was coming would be ordinary. Asterisk. The morning sun poured through the cabin window, painting everything in gold. Linda woke up early, feeling lighter than usual. She made coffee and stepped outside to the deck. The lake was calm, its surface smooth like glass. She breathed in the crisp air and smiled to herself. It had been so long since she'd felt peace like this. Eric and Chloe were still asleep, so she decided to take a walk by the water. The ground was cool beneath her shoes, and the quiet was soothing. As she walked along the shore, she noticed the same man she'd seen last night, the one from the neighboring cabin. He was sitting on a bench, holding a sketchbook. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Looks like we're both early risers." Linda smiled back. "I guess so. It's too beautiful to stay inside." He nodded. "I come here every year. The lake keeps me grounded." He paused for a moment, then added softly, "My wife used to love it here." Linda felt a pang in her chest. "I'm sorry," she said gently. He looked down at his sketchbook. "She passed away 2 years ago. Coming here helps me feel close to her." Linda hesitated, then said quietly, "I understand. My husband passed 3 years ago." Their eyes met, both carrying that quiet understanding only people who've known loss can share. For a while, they just stood there, watching the sunlight ripple on the water. "I'm Mark," he finally said, offering a small smile. "Linda," she replied, shaking his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mark." From that moment, their morning walks became a quiet routine. They talked about small things, books, travel, even favorite meals. Mark told her he used to be an architect before retiring early. He loved designing homes that made people feel safe and alive. Linda laughed at that, saying she once dreamed of being an artist, but ended up managing a library instead. Their conversations felt effortless, easy in a way Linda hadn't experienced in years. Later that afternoon, Eric and Chloe joined her by the dock for lunch. While setting the table, Linda saw Mark walking toward them with 2 cups of lemonade. "I thought you might like something cold," he said kindly. Eric looked surprised but smiled. "You must be our neighbor, Mark Dalton," he said, shaking Eric's hand. "Your mum and I have been talking about how beautiful the lake is." "Well, I'm glad she's found someone to chat with," Eric joked lightly, making Linda blush. They all sat down together. The air was filled with laughter, the sound of birds, and the smell of grilled food. For the first time in years, Linda felt like she was part of something warm again. That evening, after dinner, Mark invited Linda and Chloe to watch the sunset from his cabin porch. They sat wrapped in blankets, sipping cocoa, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange. Mark shared stories about his travels, and Chloe listened with fascination. Linda found herself laughing more than she had in a long time. As night fell, Mark turned to Linda. "You have a beautiful family," he said softly. "You remind me what hope looks like." Linda didn't know what to say. She just smiled and looked out at the stars. For years, she'd felt like her world had stopped turning. But now, sitting beside this kind stranger, she felt something stir again, something small but real. When she returned to her cabin that night, Eric noticed the quiet happiness on her face. "Did you have a good evening?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply. "It was peaceful." She didn't tell him about the soft conversation, or how Mark's gentle words had eased a part of her heart she thought would always stay broken. But as she looked through the window and saw the light still glowing in Mark's cabin next door, she couldn't help but feel that life was quietly leading her somewhere new. The next morning arrived with bright skies and a gentle breeze drifting across the lake. Linda was in the kitchen making breakfast when Eric appeared, looking cheerful. "Mom," he said, "let's go for a walk after we eat." "Just you and me. Chloe wants to stay in and finish her book." Linda smiled and agreed, happy to spend time with him. As they walked along the lakeside trail, she spotted Mark sitting on a bench, sketchbook in hand again. He looked up, grinning when he saw them. "Morning, Linda," he called out. Linda waved back. Morning, Mark. I see you're already working. Eric turned to him. You must be the famous Mark one keep hearing about, he said teasingly. Linda gave her son a look, embarrassed, but Mark just laughed. Guilty as charged, he said. Your mom's been great company. The three of them began walking together, the lake shimmering beside them. Conversation came easily. Mark asked Eric about his job. Eric talked about his design firm, and Linda simply listened, surprised at how natural everything felt. There was no awkwardness, no forced politeness, just an easy connection that made her feel lighter. When they reached the lookout point, Mark offered to take their picture. You two stand by the rocks, he said. Linda laughed as Eric pulled her close. The photo turned out beautifully, the lake shining behind them. But what Linda noticed later was how happy she looked, genuinely happy. Not the polite kind she wore for holidays or birthdays. Back at the cabin, Eric started preparing lunch while Linda arranged the table outside. Mark passed by again, carrying a small basket. I picked up some fruit at the market this morning, he said. Thought you might like some. Eric grinned. You're welcome to join us, Mark. There's plenty of food. Linda looked at her son, surprised by his warmth. He seemed unusually happy about Mark's company. During lunch, the conversation flowed easily. Mark told funny stories from his architecture days. Chloe shared her dream of becoming a travel writer, and Eric teased his mother about her old camera. Mom used to take pictures of every single thing, he said with a laugh. Even burnt pancakes. Linda rolled her eyes. Well, I was documenting your childhood chaos. Everyone laughed and even Mark chuckled. It had been years since Linda had felt such genuine joy filling the air around her. That afternoon, the sky grew cloudy and soft rain began to fall. The family stayed inside, playing board games and drinking tea. Mark dropped by later with a chessboard and challenged Eric to a game. The two men sat by the fireplace, chatting easily while Linda watched from the couch. She couldn't explain it, but seeing them get along so naturally filled her with warmth and a bit of confusion. When Eric went to bed early that night, tired from the long day, Linda stepped outside for some air. The rain had stopped, and the lake reflected the moonlight like a silver mirror. She noticed Mark standing on his porch looking at the sky. He waved softly. Beautiful, isn't it? It is, she replied. The quiet makes it even more peaceful. Mark nodded. It's rare to meet someone who appreciates silence. They stood there in comfortable stillness, just two people breathing in the night air. When she finally turned to go inside, he said gently, Good night, Linda. Good night, Mark. Inside, Linda sat by the window for a while, thinking. She hadn't planned to meet anyone here. This was supposed to be a simple family trip, a few days of rest and memories. But somewhere between morning walks and shared laughter, something had changed. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but it felt warm, unexpected, and alive. For the first time in years, her heart wasn't just remembering the past, it was quietly wondering about the future. Asterisk. The last morning at Lake Tahoe arrived too soon. The sky was pale blue, the air cool, and the sound of birds echoed through the quiet woods. Linda woke early, packing slowly, not wanting the trip to end. She looked out the window at the calm lake and felt a strange heaviness in her chest. The days had passed too quickly, almost like a dream. Eric was outside making a phone call while Chloe sat by the fireplace, reading. Linda finished folding the last of her clothes and carried her suitcase to the door. Just then, Eric walked in, smiling in a way that seemed unusual, almost nervous. Mum, he said carefully, can we talk before we go? Of course, she replied, curious. He sat at the table and took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you. This trip wasn't just a random family vacation. Linda frowned slightly. What do you mean? Eric looked down for a moment before meeting her eyes. I planned this for you. I wanted you to relax, to smile again. I wanted you to meet someone. She blinked, confused. Meet someone? Eric, what are you talking about? He hesitated, then said softly, Mark isn't a stranger, Mom. He's someone I know from work. We met months ago on a project. When I found out he lost his wife too, I thought maybe you two would understand each other. Linda stared at him, speechless. Her heart thudded in her chest. You invited him here? Yes, Eric admitted, his voice calm but sincere. I asked him to stay in the cabin next to ours. I didn't tell you because I didn't want it to feel forced. I just wanted you to have a chance to talk, to laugh again. You deserve that. Linda didn't know what to say. She sat quietly, emotions flooding her: surprise, confusion, even gratitude. She looked toward the window where sunlight was spilling across the lake. Eric, she whispered, you planned all this. For me? He nodded. Mom, you've been alone for so long. Dad wouldn't have wanted that. He loved you too much to see you close your heart forever. Her eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table and held his hand. You're just like your father, she said softly. Always thinking of others. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Linda wiped her eyes quickly. When she opened it, Mark stood there holding 2 cups of coffee. I made an extra, he said with a gentle smile. Thought you might like one before you go. For a moment, Linda just looked at him, really looked at him. The kindness in his eyes, the calmness in his voice. It all felt different now that she knew the truth. Thank you, she said, taking the cup. Eric gave her a knowing smile and stepped outside with Chloe to pack the car. Leaving Linda and Mark alone, Mark looked slightly nervous. I hope you're not upset, he said quietly. Eric told me everything. He thought maybe we could help each other heal a bit. Linda let out a soft laugh through her tears. Upset? No. Just surprised. It's been a long time since anyone thought I needed that. Mark smiled. Maybe it's time someone did. They stood by the porch, sipping coffee, watching the water glisten in the sunlight. There was no rush, no pressure, just quiet understanding between 2 people who had both known loss, yet still found warmth in the simple presence of another. When it was finally time to leave, Linda turned to Mark and said, Maybe we can keep in touch. He nodded, eyes bright. I'd like that very much. As Eric drove them away, Linda looked out the window one last time. Mark was still standing there, waving gently. She smiled to herself, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The trip she thought was only about family had turned into something far more, a new beginning. For the first time since losing Robert, Linda didn't feel like life was behind her. She felt like it was just beginning again, quietly and beautifully, by the edge of a peaceful lake.